Chapter 121. Unreasonable Demands. The reason for the silence became obvious half an hour later, when a runner from the walls arrived with a message. "Your Highness, this arrived for you by arrow," he explained. In fact, the scroll was still wrapped around the arrow and sealed with wax, marking the origin as a member of the Dago's royal family. "Your Highness Princess Alexis, in consideration of your presence within the city of Burton, we have held off on firebombing the city for 1 day. Should you surrender the city and present yourself, unarmed and unaccompanied, within the next 24 hours, there will be no need for civilian casualties. For their crimes against Dagos, the lives of Dominic Wavemates and the family of Marquis Burton are to be considered forfeit. I am looking forward to your positive response. Duke Albrols." Dominic looked at the scroll. He didn't recall doing anything in particular to this duke. In fact, he had never been to Albrols. This had to be because he was a Wavemates dragonkin. Interesting. They not only know that we are present, but they know who you are. Dagos considers the entire Wavemates royal family to be wanted criminals. But they have also considered your presence important enough to individually name you before the Marquis Burton. Princess Alexis noted. "I'm not sure if I should be honored or not, but somehow it feels good to feel wanted." Dominic joked. Princess Alexis sighed as she read the letter again, then looked out over the city. "You know that they have enough men there to storm the city and force their way in, right? Even if we stop the airships, it's only a matter of time before the city is either starved out or burned to the ground and sacked. I knew that this mission was unlikely to have a good ending when I volunteered, but this is faster than expected. With the natural suns here and the Magitech orbs for the mages, I give it 3 weeks if we can contain most of the fires. 3 weeks to either fight our way free or find a way to get them to leave." She spoke softly, but Dominic noticed that she hadn't mentioned surrender. They surely wouldn't kill a captured royal from Signia, and if the city fell, the rest of them would all be killed anyhow. It would be faster for her to surrender, but the result was likely to be the same. Dominic had zero faith that they wouldn't burn the city to the ground the moment that they had the princess, no matter what her response was. Moments later, the door burst open and Marquis Burton rushed in, flanked by his older sons. He also had a scroll in his hand, with the same wax-sealed emblem on it. "This was delivered to me by one of the staff." He huffed, then slammed the paper on the desk and glared at the princess and Dominic. "Marquis Burton, you worthless sack of shit. You have 6 hours to bring me the bodies of the princess, her guards, and her advisor, or our artillery will begin the firebombing of your city. If you want to have any commoners left in your so-called marches, you know what to do." Dominic wondered what the whole insult to the Burton marches was about. When the title was granted, Burton was the border between Dagos and Signia, but that was hundreds of years ago, and the border had moved 600 kilometers north since then, over the course of 4 major wars. "Is there something I should know about your relationship with Duke Albrols?" Princess Alexis asked. "The Duke? No, why?" Princess Alexis pointed at the wax seal, then the words on the paper. "It seems he is somewhat less than fond of you." The Marquis shrugged. "One of his sons is married to my second daughter, but they have been for a decade, and I haven't heard any news of marital issues. I really don't know what has him so worked up." The princess nodded. "Well, their first move was to try to turn us against each other to force an early capitulation. A sure sign of desperation, but possibly unwarranted desperation, given their numbers." The son of Marquis Burton shook his head. "I don't think that it is unwarranted, but rather a failure of their leadership to adapt to combat realities. All of our reports from near the border show units and villages overrun by the mechanized advance of the Dagos army. In my opinion, they may have believed that they would actually overrun the city walls on the first day, and they never expected to face the riflemen and level of artillery fire that they did. I don't know if my father has made it public yet, but the powder stores were deliberately spoiled when we opened the casks last night." Princess Alexis glared at the Marquis, whose furious glare was turned on his son. "What am I in trouble for? The royal family has priority for all defensive information." The young man defended himself from his father's fury. "All right, so we know that there are more spies in the city, and that there is a reason they had expected that you would not be able to mount a defense. The Natural Sons are a new regiment and easily mistaken for a reserve unit, given their uniforms and lack of lineage. If that was the case, it puts things in a new light. The question is, do we call his bluff immediately, or do we wait for him to make the first move? Alexis asked. All eyes turned to Dominic, as her advisor. I say we recommence the bombardment of their position and assign extra guards from the Natural Sons to the mages on cannon duty. The number of Magitech orbs is limited, and we can't spare many if they do encircle the city. If we take out more of their artillery this morning, we can force an infantry charge at the walls from across open ground, with both riflemen and artillery on defense. Dominic recommended. The Marquis frowned, but his sons nodded in agreement. It was better to move first, and not give the enemy time to put a new plan in action. I believe that they are stalling. They have infiltrators in the city already, and among the keep staff. I suspect that they are going to make another move today, and they needed time for their people to get in position. The older son agreed. Then we will follow the princess' order. Speak, and we will obey. The Marquis affirmed. Target their artillery and vehicles. Destroy their supplies and ability to stop our deliveries, and they might not be able to outlast us at a siege. Chapter 122. Preventative Artillery. The order was quickly written, and a new mage was called in to reinforce the barrier over the top of the keep the moment that the guns started to fire. For a few tense minutes, they waited, and then the barrage of cannon fire from the walls began. It was coming from all sides of the tower, letting Dominic know that while they didn't report any attacks over the evening, the enemy had moved their forces to surround the city, and not just to focus on the north wall. That was a questionable call if they didn't know how many defenders were in Burton. But if they knew that they had a significant advantage, they might be hoping to spread the defenders so thin that they couldn't effectively protect every front. They should know that the gunpowder had been spoiled as well. But that reminded Dominic. What did they do to spoil the gunpowder? They didn't pilfer a portion of it to use against the keep later, did they? He asked. The elder son of the Marquis shook his head. No, it's all there, and all the kegs were full. They poured them full of wine from barrels that were stored in the same area for soldier rations. Princess Alexis made an annoyed sound, and then shook her head. The wine will take forever to dry out from the gunpowder, and I have no idea how bad the leftover product will be. I wouldn't count on salvaging any of it. But that makes it even more important that we keep up the rotation of mages along the walls. Let them think that we have more powder than they knew about, and that we're not shy about using it. If we're lucky, they'll think that their infiltrator lied to them and failed their mission, and that might change their plans. The longer that we delay, the better. We're still waiting on strategic reports from the rest of the royal family, and I expect that there will be multiple other attacks this morning. When they tried to assassinate us last time, they hit all of us in the same afternoon. I would expect no less of them this time. She insisted. The Marquis nodded. They have been building their armies for some time. But my immediate concern is whether they're acting alone. If it is just Dagos, there is some hope that we might be able to deal with them. If they have teamed up with West Kyria, the number of troops that they will be able to field will be far beyond anything that we can hope to handle. West Kyria was a small nation to the east of Dagos, who shared a border with a portion of northern Signia. While they weren't as advanced with their techno-magic as Signia was, they were known to have a large number of mages and witches among their population. And they had a much higher population than most of their neighbors. Are we not concerned about them teaming up with Axbridge? They might not share a border with us, but they have a large border with Dagos. The younger son asked. Dominic shook his head. No, I was there for a number of years. They took so many new serfs from Wavemates that at one point Dagos had to send envoys requesting that they stop accepting refugees from the former capital as it was becoming depopulated. Things are tense between them, and I believe that Axbridge might be eyeing portions of southern Dagos for themselves. The locals haven't been particularly welcoming to the northerners, and half of what used to be Wavemates is still abandoned a decade after the conquest. The Marquis snapped his fingers. So, that's why they called you a criminal and wanted you turned over. You were an agitator within their new territories. Dominic laughed. There were so many foreign soldiers in every former Wavemates village that survived the war that nobody even dared to breathe freely, much less openly rebel. No, they said that because I am a Wavemates Dragonkin, not merely because I'm from Wavemates. Dominic explained, with a tap on his short golden horns. Well, mostly. I am sure that they have at least a few reasons to call me a threat to society. Like the day that Dagos invaded, the months after that as Dominic fought his way west into Axbridge, or just this last year, when he made his way to Signia. He had been caught more than once by soldiers, and he had exactly zero sympathy for them. Princess Alexis kept her face carefully neutral as she listened to Dominic's excuses. There was no doubt in her mind that those casual words covered up many brutal deaths, but he still looked so wholesome and innocent. He really did remind her of a favorite protagonist in one of the romance books she had read. Such wonderful men only existed in books, but he wasn't too bad, she thought. At the very least, he wasn't a lecherous pig corrupted by privilege. Plus, he blushed so adorably when you teased him. Dominic had no idea that she thought such things about him, and assumed that her soft smile was a result of a mutual lack of concern for the welfare of Dago's occupation army soldiers. The Marquis, on the other hand, had taken the interaction in a completely opposite direction, and thought that Dominic's vague description and Princess Alexis' amusement paired to mean that Dominic really was guilty of war crimes too unspeakable to be brought up in decent company. It wasn't unheard of for nobles to do horrible things for the good of their nation, and Dragonkin aged slowly. It was better not to ask, he decided. Slowly. The sound of cannons was met with the sound of returned fire, as the Dagos occupation force realized that their attempt to settle this, without a battle, had been denied. Flaming boulders and clay casks full of burning oil were lobbed into the city, and the locals sprung into action, using bags of sand to douse the fires on clay-tiled roofs before they spread too far. But that would not last long. Fire was pernicious, and eventually, it would find a foothold. Chapter 123, Firebombing. The mages along the walls used a bit of their mana to block incoming flaming projectiles, while letting ones that weren't obviously attempts to firebomb the city pass. They were limited in their abilities, and the cannons were their highest priority. Shame we didn't have more cannons. Princess Alexis sighed. Marquis Burton shrugged. This defense has held for over a century. Granted, we haven't faced an attack on this level, but it has served us well. Dominic stepped to the window and began erecting small, area barrier spells to block flaming projectiles while they planned. He didn't need to stop them entirely, just slow them enough they fell short of the city, or shatter the vessel, and then the oil would disperse into a fireball in the sky. The messenger standing by the window, with Dominic, began to relay messages. The north wall is holding strong. Rifleman Commander Dax has confirmed a Dagos noble kill by rifle from 1,100 meters. The west wall is holding, but the fire is starting to take root in the city there. Eastern forces report minimal enemy artillery, but preparations for an infantry assault. Southern wall forces report an enemy retreat. Forces upstream have poisoned the river, and their men are falling ill. Why didn't their mages cleanse the toxin? Marquis Burton asked. Princess Alexis shook her head. They don't have any. Or not enough anyhow. After the attack on Wavemates, nearly every magic user in the nation fled. If you thought that the nobles' insignia were cruel to non-humans and magic users, then you would be appalled at how they are treated in Dagos. So, while they are attacking and they have the ability to craft magitech devices, they're short on people who can actually use them. Now, I see why they're becoming desperate to take portions of Signia. The Marquis realized. The princess nodded. They're falling behind in the magic race to advanced technology. If they don't do something, they're in trouble. But they've decided that diplomacy was not the answer. Dominic continued to block projectiles so that the mages could focus on loading cannons. A barrage of cannon fire came for the top of the keep, and Princess Alexis laughed as Dominic blocked them, then flipped off the enemy spotters. He was having far too much fun this morning. Is it just me, or is the artillery all targeting the keep? The oldest son of Marquis Burton asked. They have stopped firebombing the city to focus on the advisor. The messenger at the window concurred. Is that wise? The messenger just shrugged. How was he supposed to answer that? If it wasn't a good idea on Dominic's part, they were about to get a cannonball through the wall of the strategy room. The mage who had been sent up for defense duty smiled at the Marquis. "Sir, you need not concern yourself overmuch about that. The advisor knows what he is doing. The distraction is buying time for the locals to put out the fires in the city before they can spread too far, and every minute, we destroy more of their artillery." The princes and the Marquis updated the battlefield map as reports came to the door, and Dominic spared them a bit of attention as the attacks by Dago's artillery returned to their original targets. It had taken a few minutes, but someone must have realized that he was just distracting them from their work and wasn't likely to be injured by the attacks. They are building up along the highway on both sides of the city. It looks like Dago's is planning a simultaneous east and west charge to attempt to breach the city gates. Marquis Burton noted as they placed markers on the map. Princess Alexis nodded. "That's my impression as well. So the question is if they're going to go all out on a northern offensive, or if the soldiers in the south are only faking illness." Dominic watched as half of the airships descended, adding their firepower to the assault and devastating the backlines of the Dago's force, which were out of range of the city's cannons. That extra level of attack, on forces that would have traditionally been considered safe from retaliation, was crushing enemy morale, as well as their supplies. Dago's has lost over half their remaining artillery in the last 15 minutes. Dominic noted when he finished blocking attempts to burn the city. The enemy was running low on ammunition, thanks to the efforts of the airships to target their supply stations, and the rate of fire of the defenders was causing chaos in their ranks. At this point, they were too busy to be doing anything but protecting themselves and digging in to fortify their remaining positions against Burton City's defenders. Then, a massive explosion outside the city caught everyone's attention. The airships just detonated a munitions storage location on the south side. The crater is hundreds of meters wide. Estimated casualties are in the thousands. The messenger relayed. That would change things. Secondary explosions followed from the south as the bombardment continued, then another explosion rocked the east side of the battlefield. A second munitions storage vehicle has detonated. The army has begun to charge the walls. Orders: order the riflemen, archers, and cannons to target the infantry. Signal the airships to continue their work on the supply lines and reserves. Princess Alexis ordered before the Marquis could speak. Battle horns were sounding, and Dominic could see a few vehicles modified as rams among the eastern and western forces. They're aiming for a mechanized battering ram along the road entrances. Expect 60+ kilometers an hour and 20 tons of vehicle. Dominic relayed, looking out the window of the keep. Marquis Burton swallowed hard then nodded. "We have prepared for this. Barricade trucks to the gates." A large vehicle rolled out of a warehouse by each gate, equipped with what looked like a portcullis on a frame. They drove up to the wooden gates, pushed them solidly in place, and then crews began hammering posts through holes in the support arms, anchoring them in the ground. As long as the ram vehicle didn't manage to crush the portcullis support, the gates should be secure. And the riflemen were not going to make it easy for the vehicles to get to the wall unscathed. Chapter 124. Fog of War. The eastern battering ram was the first to fall, as a cannonball detonated inside its cab, tearing apart the drive mechanisms and rupturing the pressure vessel. The western front had better luck, as the driver had raised the plow-shaped ram to guard his windows. It had taken dozens of hits with minimal damage, but Dominic could see that the vehicle was spewing steam as it approached the gate. A round must have bounced under the ram and hit the undercarriage. Dominic couldn't hear the impact over the sounds of battle, but he could see the backside of the western gate, and it didn't buckle after the truck disappeared from sight. Again, white smoke was beginning to block the view over the wall as the cannons continued to fire. At least the Natural Sons Regiment wasn't making the issue worse. Their rifles were all compressed air and magic-powered, so they didn't give off the signature white smoke of a black powder firearm. But there were some upsides to the situation. Neither side could see what was happening from a distance, so the remaining artillery couldn't tell if they were hitting the city or mage barriers, and they were unable to target the emplacements on the walls. Then, the airships began to rush back into the sky, leaving only two to continue harassing the army on the ground. Incoming Dago's heavy transport fleet. 30 airships, lightly armed, loaded with infantry for paratrooper insertion. The airship commander announced over the radio. That would let Dagos know that they had been spotted, but the commander had deemed it more important that the forces on the ground knew what might be coming if they didn't stop them before they got in drop range of the city. Overhead, the battle began in the distance, but over the next half hour, Dominic could tell that they were getting closer, even if he wasn't watching the steady stream of soldiers floating down from the sky. They had started far off in the distance, but the closest ones now were in rifle range, and few were making it to the ground alive as the riflemen turned their attention upwards. It was an absolute massacre, and the soldiers outside the walls were coated in blood before they even reached archer range. Dominic shook his head. What sort of insane strategy is this? I know that many commanders don't care much about conscripted forces, but this is inhuman. Princess Alexis and the Marquis came to the window to see what he was talking about, just in time for the incoming troopers to get close enough that the mages along the walls could hit them with fireballs. The magic exploded in the air and lingered, burning bodies and parachute strings alike. The unfortunate soldiers plummeted hundreds of meters to the ground, onto their charging allies. And those were the lucky ones, as most who didn't get hit by fireballs were landing critically injured from rifle shots. Then, the cannons directly above their heads, on top of the keep, began to fire, sending flak into troopers from an airship that had gotten close enough to put troops into the city. Incoming aerial invasion. Barriers up. Prepare the militia archers. Princess Alexis ordered. The response was predictably bloody and brutal, but the artillery of the Dagos army suddenly picked up its firing rate, and units that were previously thought destroyed began to set up, bombarding the north wall, closest to the paratroopers. Many of the soldiers were forced to take cover, and others were lost as sections of the upper battlements were shattered. But the majority of the riflemen moved down the ramps, out of the direct line of fire, but still able to aim up. It wasn't enough. Hundreds of troopers in a second wave were coming down as the first wave was eliminated, and the north wall couldn't take them all out in time. One after another, Dagos paratroopers landed in the city. Some landed in the streets, some slid down clay tiles and fell from roofs, and others were caught in trees only to be hacked apart by the citizens of Burton. While most of the commoners didn't have any weapons training, that didn't mean that they would not attempt to defend the city during an invasion, or that the guard hadn't been passing out spears ever since the threat of war started. Every household had at least a few, and whole bundles were stacked in the lobbies of most of the apartment buildings. The Dagos army took the successful landing of even a few paratroopers as a victory, and they were working quickly to set fires and cause chaos within the city. The faster that the chaos spread, the sooner that Burton would fall, they assumed. But the people of Burton were not going to let this insult go so lightly, and not long after the wave of troops landed in the city, they began hurling the mangled corpses of paratroopers back over the wall. The invaders were predictably not impressed with that, or the failure of their first attempt to storm the city. There were fires in dozens of locations, but the only troopers who had made it into the city had all landed in the same area, and the tactic had proven highly ineffective after their loss of the air battle. Dagos armored convoy located. No airship support spotted. We are moving to intercept. The Signia airship commander reported. So, the invaders weren't going to give up. In the distance, the army was digging trenches and settling in for the siege, now that the blitz of the city had failed. But what Dominic couldn't help but notice was the distance. They had set the trenches 1,500 meters out from the walls, at the very edge of cannon range, where the riflemen couldn't target them. At least, not easily. What do you think their strategy here is? Are they setting a staging area for another imminent assault? Or do they plan to wait us out? Dominic asked the two better-trained nobles in the room. Princess Alexis shook her head. I think that they're planning to cut us off from reinforcements and see how long we can keep the army supplied. They don't know that we've got the Magitech abilities to create more munitions, so they likely assume that we will be out within a few days or a week at the most. But the airships have enough supplies to stay up longer than that, and they can continue to bombard the trenches as well. As long as the cloud cover holds, they won't be able to prove that it's the same group every day. Chapter 125. Trench Lines. Every night, the Marquis Burton returned to the safe rooms with his family, so Princess Alexis and Dominic took over his suite on the top floor of the keep, where they would be close to the reports and in a position to see most of the city. It wasn't the greatest accommodation, but with a bit of alteration, the room now contained 2 beds, and the guards were staying right across the hall when they were not on duty. It might have been considered unconventional, but Alexis had deemed it inefficient to have them going up and down 5 flights of stairs every day, when their job here was to protect someone who didn't leave the tower. Over the course of the next week, the airships reported 3 more mechanized convoys coming for Burton, none of which ever made it to them. With their vehicles crippled, they would have to move on foot if they weren't going to retreat, and that would take weeks. Long enough that even the airships would have to return to restock on fuel and food before the majority of the enemy troops arrived. On the 7th day, the Dago's force began to work on new trench lines, moving them 100 meters closer to the city. That still wouldn't be close enough that they could launch an effective artillery bombardment of the city, as they were downhill. But every time that they moved forward gave them a little better position. All around the city, the cannons fired periodically at the workers, but at the extended range, there wasn't much they could do to the soldiers hiding below ground level. However, Dominic wasn't idle as they waited. He had spent most of the first day making ammunition for the few riflemen that the city guard held. Then the second day, he had spent casting mana pistols using clay to steel, as the city of Burton was nearly depleted of iron and steel stores. For some reason, the forges in town hadn't been resupplied in weeks before the invasion. The new pistols weren't great quality, as his spellbook hadn't significantly improved. But they were good enough to be functional in an emergency, and they were much more practical for the Royal Guard when fighting inside the keep. With a pistol in each hand, they could do much more damage to any force that breached the keep, but even with his casting molds, Dominic could only make so many of the weapons in a day. And only a limited number of people within the city were competent with them. Your Highness, we have a report. Infantry on foot is close to reaching the trench lines. We estimate that they will be arriving within the next 24 hours. What are your orders? The runner for the Natural Sons asked on the morning of the 8th day of the siege. Cycle the airships to the ground. Get them resupplied and refueled. I want them ready when the infantry arrives, as they will surely send more paratroopers to support them when they charge the city. Princess Alexis ordered. The runner headed out, and Dominic listened as the coded message was sent to cycle the ships down for supplies. They would go up with the same crew again, but that wasn't likely to be an issue. The hammocks on the airships were comfortable enough, and in this situation, it was the safest posting that they could ask for. There had been no losses among the Signia airships at Burton yet, and they were getting better by the day. That was far better than could be said for the city guard, despite the infrequent attacks sent to test their readiness. Charges from the trenches by a few dozen men at a time weren't a major threat, but a few unwary soldiers had been taken out by the auto-loading crossbows of the Dago's infantry. The first airship was down an hour later, and a messenger came up to make his report. Royal Sorcerer, they are requesting you at the docks. They have produced something while they were aloft, and they wish for you to distribute it. The soldier reported. Princess Alexis waved for Dominic to go, and he jogged down the stairs to the cargo loading area. The docks contained plenty of supplies for the crews, but Dominic noticed one thing was missing. Something to boost the crew's morale. Their efforts were the hope of everyone on the ground, and it would never do for them to get demotivated and start slacking. Bring up meals from the kitchen. I think that they will appreciate something that didn't come from dry goods in the tiny galley of the airship. Pastries, sweets, you know what to bring. Dominic instructed. Yes, sir. The soldier ran off as Dominic went to meet with the techno-wizards from the first airship. Sorcerer. Good work getting the wall cannons supplied. We made an upgraded version of the munitions cores. If you hold it this way, it makes a whole barrel of black powder. If you hold it this side up, it will make 100 solid steel cannonballs. Not pig iron, refined steel. Needless to say, that was not easy to accomplish with an unbonded Magitech orb. It's brutally mana-intensive, but I'm sure that you can make good use of it. Perhaps some of the mages in the city as well. I've got 2 of them for you, and the others will have 1 or 2 each as they land. We've kept 2 for each ship, 1 for us and 1 for the mage. That way, we can keep a small stock of munitions ready in case one or both of us are injured. He explained. So, You can let them load conventionally if the mages are out of commission or only one remains and he is asleep. Good thinking. I just didn't think that it was possible. The techno-wizard laughed. It's the same rubies, but cut and polished specifically. Here, I made you a copy of the plan, but remember royal regulations that must never be seen by anyone else, so burn it once you have memorized it. Dominic nodded. He hadn't read any such regulation, but he hadn't actually read any of the parts of the textbook that covered the creation and security of Magitech device plans. That was much later in his tutoring lesson plans. After the supposedly important things like how to address nobles, how to dress, and table manners. A fat lot of good that had done him. He didn't actually care how anyone was supposed to be addressed, and his table manners were fine before the lesson started. They should have started with military etiquette. Dominic moved the orbs into the storage device on his toe and shook the techno-wizard's hand. Don't leave just yet. I've got the runner bringing you baked goods from the kitchen. Dominic instructed. The older man laughed. And who is supposed to poison test them for us? That's why we bring only security-tested shelf-stable goods. Dominic pointed at himself. I will purify them with a spell, then taste test them for poison, so your crew can have a little treat. Taste testing a dozen rounds of pastries is a hardship, but I will do my best to endure. Behind him, Dominic heard the loading crew chuckle. If you run out of stamina, we will volunteer to taste the baking of his lordship's kitchens in your place. One of the dockworkers offered. See? No shortage of poison testers. Chapter 126. Motivated Flyers. The sacks of pastries came up a moment later, and Dominic grabbed one of each before casting Quality Kibble, the amusingly named purification spell. Oh, I think you have an admirer in the kitchens, Lord Techno-Wizard. They sent you a whole batch of pistachio and chocolate croissants. Dominic noted. The old man stole the remainder of the pastry from Dominic's hand with a scowl. You only need one bite to test for poison. Give me that. They're my favorite. Dominic sampled the others, tearing off one bite and then handing the rest to the dockworkers standing nearby. One bite of each of 6 different types of pastry wasn't much, but it was a nice little break in the middle of their shift. Sir, the cargo is loaded. We're just waiting on the last crewman. The dock master informed them. Good luck up there. You've all been doing wonderful work, and it's saving our backsides. Dominic called as the techno-wizard ran back to his ship. I brought more pastries. There are all 12 ships coming down, right? The runner asked. Dominic nodded. Yeah, over the next 2 hours or so. Assuming that they don't see any enemy airships. They'll stretch it out another day, or 2 if they need to. We called them down well, before they were out of supplies. Dominic watched carefully to see if there were any strange reactions to the news, but he didn't see any. The earlier attacks had made him paranoid about traitors inside the city, or that they had missed one of the Dago's invaders, and they had blended into the general population. One by one, the airships came down and the Dago's artillery tried to shoot them out of the sky. Unfortunately, they weren't even getting close, as the airship dock was right in the middle of the city. The best they could do was lob the occasional shot over the walls, and earn a punitive volley from the airships on their way out. Firing from above and aiming down into the trenches, the cannons could cause some real devastation when they hit their targets. Each techno-mage handed him a few more of the orbs, and Dominic began to formulate a plan for how they could be used best. The mages were limited, but they were doing a wonderful job of keeping the cannons firing with existing self-loading cannon orbs. But if they pretended to be running low on magical assistance and started carting out powder kegs and cannonballs, they might be able to trick the enemy into an early charge, as they would think that the defenders hadn't noticed the spoiled powder yet. As Dominic turned to head back into the keep after the last airship had finished its strafing run and returned to the clouds, he noticed that 2 more were coming down. They were the first pair that had come down for supplies, so Dominic waited as they landed at the docks and the crews got busy, wondering what was wrong. Relax, gentlemen. We just got the idea that Dago's soldiers can probably count as well as our own, so wouldn't they know how many airships we landed? It's better if they report more than we actually have. Either they'll stop sending paratroopers, or they'll have to send a much stronger response, thinking that we have an extra 2 ships hidden somewhere. The captain explained. So, the ground crews made themselves look busy, moving empty crates in and out of the ship, following the same process as a regular restocking mission, except they carried the same crate both ways. Once they had put on the show long enough, the ships left again, and Dominic prepared to return to the princess. He was just entering the keep when the royal guards found him. Dominic, come with us. We're going to the wall. It's good for morale for the city's soldiers to see their leaders on the wall with the archers and riflemen. We will be counting on you to protect the princess. Colonel Wilkes informed him in a dry tone. The royal guard was likely better at it than Dominic was, but it would look weak for her to cower behind them if the wall was attacked. Give me a second to put on my armor. I've got to make an impression if we're going to visit the wall. Dominic agreed. The guards laughed and made a grabbing gesture, indicating that they would help him into his armor. Dominic stripped off his robes and threw on the chain layers with their thick linen underlay, then put the robes back on to equip the chest and shoulder plates, plus the gauntlets. All right, now we're ready, Dominic decided. Colonel Wilkes lifted Dominic's hood and pulled it down so that his whole face was shadowed, unlikely to be recognized from a distance. For the full mysterious magical advisor vibe. They joined the group with the princess and Marquis Burton, and Dominic fell in a step behind them, so the guards could form AV around them as they walked down the elevated roadways. They didn't take the cars to the wall. That would hide their presence. Walking in the open so that everyone could see them reminded the people of Burton that someone was in charge and thinking of their safety. Dominic wasn't sure how true that was, but that was what the book said the purpose of these excursions was. The natural sons stood a bit straighter at attention as they passed, smiling and waving, as Dominic watched the area for threats. The princess was in freshly polished armor, glinting in the sun, so there would be no mistake that someone important was on the wall, in clear sight of the enemy. Movement in the distance caught Dominic's attention, and he watched as a Dagos soldier hidden under the ruins of a destroyed vehicle moved a rifle to his shoulder and carefully opened the steam chamber on his pack. A hidden enemy sniper. But Dominic's eyesight was better than average, and he had spent years looking for game in the underbrush. The man twitched a little as he prepared to fire, and Dominic raised his hand, bringing up an area barrier, at the same instant that the sound of the rifle firing reached them. A split second later, the bullet flattened on the transparent magical barrier, wide of the princess, but only by a few centimeters. Everyone stopped, and Dominic hurled an arcane blast at the spot where the sniper was hiding. It was likely out of range of his spell, but the direction of the retaliation was enough to let all the riflemen know where to look. So, a barrage of bullets passed the spell before it hit the husk of the transport truck, revealing the already deceased sniper and his punctured steam pack. Chapter 127. Wall Walk. Princess Alexis nodded politely at Dominic, but he could see the hidden shock in her expression. Getting a sniper that close was no small feat. Shall we continue? She asked, with an exaggerated look of disgust at the deceased sniper. They walked away just as the Dagos artillery began to hammer into the wall around them. Dominic kept the barrier active, just large enough to protect their group from artillery, but none of the shots were close enough to threaten them directly, and the princess walked calmly through the attack as the natural sons and city guard archers took cover. Beside her, Marquis Burton was doing a much worse job of pretending not to be terrified. Are you sure that this is a good idea? We should take cover during an assault, the Marquis muttered. No, we should be clearly visible leading our troops during an assault. Relax, we're safer than you think. From that range, the cannons will be off by up to 20 meters of their target. See how half of the shots are hitting the ground before even reaching the wall. If something actually comes for us, it will be pure luck, and we have a barrier for that. Princess Alexis informed him. When they reached the center of the wall, horns sounded in the distance, and the Dagos army rose up out of the trenches to charge across no man's land toward the city walls. There we go. We've got them out in the open before their reinforcements arrived. Now, it's up to the riflemen, the princess declared, looking vaguely relieved, but still incredibly nervous. They reached the central tower on the north wall, and Dominic motioned for them to wait. I have an orb to create powder and solid shot. Give me a moment, and I will make a stockpile here in the tower for distribution, in case the mages get tired during the assault. he explained. "How much can you make?" Marquis Burton asked. "A few kegs of powder and a few hundred rounds of shot shouldn't be too hard. I will do the same at the other towers if we walk that far." That was unlikely to happen in one day. The full walk around the city was close to 10 kilometers. Once they stepped inside, Dominic got to work. First a keg of powder, which was no struggle. Then 100 steel cannonballs, at 3 kilograms each. That was significantly more challenging, but the weight was more than twice that of the powder. Dominic thought it was an odd choice, as anyone would struggle to make 100 at a time. But it matched the amount of powder that the orb made. Until he had time to examine the blueprint, he wouldn't be able to tell if there was a good reason for things being the way that they were designed. But while it took a few seconds to make the balls, it wasn't too much for him to handle. So, Dominic made 5 more kegs of powder, then started to create the corresponding pallets of shot. That should keep the north wall for an hour or two if the mages are down. Set someone on watch in the tower, so nothing happens to it, Dominic announced, addressing the last bit to the soldier outside the door. "I will distribute them now," the soldier offered. The princess nodded. "Call a team. I want them all to go out at once." There were only 12 cannons on the entire north wall, and it was 10 paces between riflemen. But putting the ammunition halfway between cannons for now would make it accessible when the teams were preparing to use it. The soldiers were quickly crossing the fields, but they had started much too far away. In armor, it would take them close to 10 minutes to run the entire distance uphill to the walls. In Dominic's mind, it would have made more sense to spend another week or two digging the trenches closer. But they were coming in force today, and from what Dominic could see, it looked like they had nearly emptied the trenches. The cannons adjusted their aim, firing low to detonate rounds in the front ranks of the charging soldiers. Then the volleys of arrows began, and the infantry raised their shields. But the rifles didn't care about shields, and the front rank began to collapse under the hail of fire from the riflemen. No movement from the southern front. Only east, west, and north. "It looks like they really are in dire straits," Colonel Wilkes reported, relaying the flag messages from the other sides of town. Then, a few seconds later, under 2,000 troops on the east and west flanks, 5,000 on the north. Dominic watched as the riflemen cut down the front ranks of the charge, and the shield wall faltered as an increasing number of arrows made it through the gaps in their tortoise shell. Then, the cannons got another volley in, and the rate of collapse increased. Dominic cleared his throat to get the princess' attention. "Should I join in the fight? The other mages are busy with the cannons, but we should show them a little bit about why Signia isn't a force to be trifled with," he asked. The charge was under 100 meters from the wall now, and Princess Alexis nodded. "If you think that you can make a difference, go ahead." With all his spells in the spellbook, Dominic had some faith in his ability to make a proper fireball. At level 1, it was big enough to create a 3-meter ball of fire and kill goblins. At level 7, it was surely better, but he hadn't ever used the spell himself. Dominic channeled mana for the spell and hurled the fireball into the infantry. When it left his hand, it was just a baseball-sized ball of fire, but when it hit the infantry, it made a 5-meter ball of fire, hot enough that it melted armor. That seemed a bit excessive. They didn't get more dead after the liquid steel dripped on their corpse. Chapter 128. Repel the Assault. Dominic split the next one into 3 balls, each with 1/3 of the spell's power. The explosions were still 5 meters wide, but the result was much more gruesome, and not an instant kill. Scorched flesh peeled from the exposed areas, as scorching armor set cotton padding on fire. 2 at a time, that should be the answer. Dominic could activate Fireball twice a second, and the barrage of flaming explosions had completely collapsed the enemy charge everywhere within 50 meters on either side of his position. The Dago's army was spreading to the sides, taking their chances with the cannons and the riflemen, just to get away from Dominic. Dozens of bullets shattered against the area barrier in front of Dominic before it collapsed, and a single round pinged off his armor. Dominic frowned, distracted from the tunnel vision of burning the infantry. He put the barrier back up as more bullets rained down on him. Then he began targeting the soldiers further back in the charge. The ones at the front were more likely to be the expendable militia members. The officers should be further back, and Dominic had no real grudge against the commoners. They just followed orders. It wasn't their idea to be here in the first place. They just waited, attacked, and died. The officers had to stop to shoot, and that marked them as targets not only for Dominic but for the Natural Sons Regiment. One after another, they fell. But in return, the riflemen lost very few. The mages behind the wall couldn't do much but fill the cannons, but they did try to keep up a basic area barrier over the wall's upper ridge to prevent the riflemen and cannons from taking return fire. The western edge of the north wall had soldiers near it now, so Dominic began jogging down the wall, firing into the infantry as he went. They had crowded together to get away from him, and now they couldn't avoid his attacks as Dominic hurled fire into their ranks faster than even the riflemen could fire. Keep up the charge. He can't keep it up for long. Signia's mage lord is bluffing. Once he collapses, he will be out for weeks. Dominic heard a Dago's commander shouting through a bullhorn, so he hit him with a fireball. This spell was even more satisfying than Arcane Blast. At either side of the north wall, the Dago's charge had made it to the wall, and ladders were being tilted up, some with shock troops at the top to be hurled into combat with the wall defenders. Dominic ran along the ramparts so he could fire straight down into the breaching teams, but even the fireballs were not enough to deal with the entire horde of soldiers who had reached the walls. Advisor retreat. The Royal Guard announced. Dominic returned to the walkway and attacked sporadically as he jogged back to the princess, who was preparing to retreat to the elevated roadways as Dago's soldiers were reaching the top of the wall, and the fight was turning into a confused melee. In that situation, they couldn't see to give orders. They had to retreat to get a proper view of the fight. The eastern and western flanks have fallen in and joined the assault on the north wall. The city's reservists have been called to duty, and the halberds have been deployed to push the ladders back. She explained when Dominic returned to the command group. The western flank has been thinned, but they're still going to reach the top of the wall. Dominic agreed. Princess Alexis nodded to the Royal Guard, and a set of horn blasts echoed over the north wall. Vats of oil were rolled up the ramps and then dumped over the walls and set on fire. That would slow the approach for a while, and it greatly reduced the number of Dago's soldiers in melee at the top of the wall. Not enough to completely stop them, but it was a start. The flames spread all along the city wall and out into the defensive trench behind the bulwark, which had previously been filled with oil. That stopped the advance entirely, but left thousands of soldiers trapped between the flames and the wall. It wasn't a new strategy, and the Dago's army was already working to put out the flames by the wall. Then, the infiltrators that they had been looking for in the city made their move. Hundreds of them, all in yellow and blue Dago's armbands, charged down the elevated walkways, surrounding the Marquis and the royal delegation. The Royal Guard swapped their rifles for pistols, which had a much higher rate of fire, and began blasting the attackers. Dominic joined the defense with fireballs and then arcane blasts as the enemy approached, and area spells were no longer safe. The distance made the guards switch to swords and shields, while Dominic relied on his magic, a somewhat nostalgic situation that reminded him of the second time that he went to fight goblins with Eleanor, the youngest princess, and her guards. The two forces crashed together, and the Marquis pushed forward, joining the Royal Guard. Then, the Marquis was suddenly falling sideways, and Dominic turned just in time to see one of his guards raise his sword, tip down, intending to impale his lord. An arcane blast hurled the traitor off the walkway, but the Marquis grunted as a spear impaled his arm. The Royal Guard killed the spear-wielding infiltrator a second later, but the damage was done, and the Marquis was heavily wounded, out of the battle. "Keep fighting, I will treat as wound," Princess Alexis announced. Dominic put an area barrier over the two of them as she worked to staunch the bleeding with a paladin's healing magic. Not perfect, but safe enough that he could focus on taking out the attackers. They were all trained soldiers, but no match for the Royal Guard. "We have a clear path away from the intersection. How long until he is stable?" Colonel Wilkes called. 10 seconds. Princess Alexis called. "Friendly riflemen coming." Dominic informed them. The Natural Sons had retreated from the wall to the roadways, giving them room to shoot, as a rifleman lost most of his worth in close combat. But that also put them closer to the attack on the royal entourage, and they were quickly cutting down the attempts to reinforce the assault on Dominic's position. There is fighting in the streets. It's going our way, but we will have to stay on the upper levels. Dominic informed the princess as she finished tying a bandage around the Marquis' arm and feeding him a potion. She was a paladin, with some healing skills, but she had only used the minimum to stabilize the Marquis. It wasn't hard to guess what she was thinking. She was going to need that energy later, and the Marquis wasn't a great fighter to start with. Chapter 129. Burton is infested. Once the Marquis was on his feet, the group started to move, and the natural suns provided covering fire for them until they were needed to defend the wall. The royal guard pushed toward the keep, where the Marquis' personal guards were surrounding the building, keeping it locked down. Nobody was coming in or out, and Dominic could see staff being turned back into the keep, presumably to keep any suspects present if some sort of sabotage was found. Get the healer for the Marquis. He has been wounded and will need extended treatment. Princess Alexis ordered. The keep staff scrambled while Princess Alexis led the way up to the strategy room. She kicked the door open, venting frustration, but then found herself facing a very startled butler with a Magitech camera in his hands. "You have no idea how fucked you are," Dominic informed the butler. The man turned and lunged for the window. That wouldn't save him. It was 10 stories from the ground, but it would be a quick end. So, Princess Alexis blocked it with an area barrier. "See, what did I tell you?" Dominic sighed, feigning sympathy. Then, he picked up the camera, which had been forgotten in the man's desperate escape attempt. "I will inspect this, or turn it over to one of the techno-wizards to examine and see what all he was trying to get images of," Dominic informed the princess. Then Dominic looked at the map and realized that it had all been changed. None of what was there was the plan that he was familiar with, and none of it matched the actual deployment of the soldiers on the line. It also didn't have any markers for the mages with the Magitech orbs. He had a lot to learn about subterfuge and secret keeping. He hadn't even considered that the princess might have rearranged the deployment map and changed all the troop numbers before she had left the room. Normally, when they retired for the night, they put everything away and rebuilt it from the morning reports. But, in the spirit of the moment, he took a blanket off the chair and lay it over the table while the guards pulled the spy to his feet. Once the traitor was gone, and the area was deemed secure, swept of Magitech devices that might be relaying their communications, and not hiding any traps or bombs, Dominic slumped on the sofa, while Alexis leaned back in the office chair and put her boots on the table. What a mess. I have no idea how they got so many infiltrators into the city in advance, and into positions of trust. This feels like they have been planning the invasion for years, and only acted now because they were sure that they could succeed. She muttered. I wouldn't say that it was impossible. When they took Wavemates, they hit the entire nation in the matter of 2 days. A blitz attack that conquered the rural areas of the nation faster than the capital fell, and Kynwyn didn't have a city wall. Dominic replied. There was a commotion in the hallway, followed by silence, and Dominic opened the door to see what was happening. The maid who had been assigned to his rooms in the tower was there with a cart of food and a fresh bandage on her arm. What happened? Should we call a healer? He asked. The maid gave him a sad look. There isn't one left to call. Last year, when I was hired, the Marquis brought in a whole group of new staff. Most of them turned on the Marquis an hour ago. The healers are dead. Most of the staff are dead, and the Marquis has been assassinated. The Marquis is being attended to by his sons, who were at the west wall until a few minutes ago. Where were you during the attack? I need to piece together what happened. Dominic asked. I was in the kitchen, then I was assigned to deliver lunch to the airship docks, but I was turned back. The guards took it to them directly. After that, I returned to the kitchens and found one of the cooks going insane with a sword. I was cut, and then ran to get the guards. But when we got back, most of the kitchen staff were either injured or dead, and the crazy man had been killed with a kitchen knife. The head chef bandaged me and most of the others up, and I learned everything else secondhand. Between the attack and now, I didn't leave the kitchen until we heard that Her Highness was back. I'm in better shape than most, so I am bringing her meal. Dominic nodded. Come in, then. I assume the guards have checked you? The maid blushed and nodded, while the guard at the kitchen lift's end of the hallway gave Dominic a wink. Well, that was interesting news. But not his business as long as the search still got done correctly. Dominic cleansed the food, and the maid smiled at him as she poison-tested it, then left the room. She would wait outside for a few minutes, just in case it was slow acting, but Dominic wasn't expecting more problems from the kitchen now that the traitors had outed themselves. At least, no more problems today. After a few minutes, they began to eat, while the princess stared at the closed door. You know, the Marquis will be completely useless from this point on. With half his staff gone and his wife murdered, he's going to be somewhere between mental chaos and depression for months. You're going to have to earn your keep as an advisor because we no longer have another trained second opinion in the room. She spoke softly but resolutely, and Dominic nodded gravely at the implication. Not just for the future, but for right now. There was still an assault on the walls happening, and they should be catching up on the reports. Guardsman, where is our signal reader? We need updates from the walls. Dominic called once they were finished eating. Waiting in the other room. The butler knocked him out with a strike to the head and dumped him in the Marquis bedroom. We found him during the clearance search. Colonel Wilkes announced. Perfect, bring him in. Chapter 130. Wall update. The man clearly had a concussion, with one pupil blown wide and the other a pinprick of black. But he had been healed, and he headed straight for the window to send signals and receive news. The east and west walls are clear. No movement in the south. The north wall is holding. There are multiple battle locations on top of the wall, but the riflemen are clearing them as we speak. Casualties are under 5%. All the cannons are still firing, and the mages are protecting them. He explained as he read the signals being sent. The airships are coming down in waves to support the fight and eliminate the backlines, but the radio says that they're heavily engaged in the sky. Dagos sent another 30 transport airships, which were intercepted to the north. Dominic sighed. If they got to drop their troops, that was another 6,000 paratroopers who would be joining the siege soon, even if they had to walk here. Have there been any reported losses among the airships? Dominic asked. Negative. We have reports of damage, but they all report operational status. Then the spotter relayed a whole collection of specific troop numbers by grid numbers, and Princess Alexis made notes so she could rearrange the table to reflect the current situation. It didn't look horrible, and the defensive death toll wasn't nearly as bad as they had feared for the first breach of the walls. But it was still disheartening to see. More airships dropped out of the clouds, and cannon fire rained down on the Dagos artillery again, crippling the lines that they had managed to erect in the trenches. Hour after hour, the battle at the walls continued, but after the second hour, the cannons were pulled away from the wall, stored in relative safety so that they weren't destroyed by the breaching forces. That made the Dagos army braver, and they doubled their efforts. Incoming mechanized force. They evaded detection by the airships, and they have been picking up paratroopers as they approach. The radio reported from the walls. Well, isn't this day just one bit of bad news after another? Alexis muttered. Should we order the cannoneers to set up on the roadways? They can fire from there, and it won't interfere with the battle on the walls. Dominic suggested. Order it, but tell them to hold fire until the mechanized force is in range. That's what we need to stop, and it will be easier if they think that the north cannons are out of commission. Princess Alexis decided. The order was relayed, and Dominic saw the mages and cannon teams moving the cannons to the most sheltered areas that they could find, which were still able to fire over the walls. They were no longer evenly spaced. Instead, they had been clustered around the mages who could reload them. But that was better for everyone. They had 1 hour of tense anticipation before the cannons started firing again, targeting the incoming vehicles. But they weren't alone. 4 of the airships had descended to bombard the convoy as well, and the damage that they managed to do to the vehicles was devastating. The lowlands around Burton were soft and muddy after all the recent rain, so the convoy had chosen to follow the top of a hill, and that put them in a nice straight line for a set of broadside barges from the airship cannons. As the sun went down, Dominic saw the first signs of the battle in the sky. An airship was burning as it fell from the sky, and then another followed soon after. Their defense fleet had been enough to keep them from airdropping on top of the city again, But the battle at the wall still wasn't over, and the survivors of the mechanized convoy had pushed through the artillery barrage to join the others at the front. All night, the battle raged, until the final wave of attackers didn't even need ladders. There were so many corpses piled at the primary attack points that they could run up them to get to the top of the wall. But time after time, they were met with the unrelenting fire of the Natural Sons Regiment and driven back over the wall. Dominic wasn't sure when he fell asleep, but he woke upright on the couch in the command room with Princess Alexis asleep across his legs and their breakfast meal sitting on the table. There was a single mage in the room who replaced the message spotter at some point last night that Dominic only vaguely remembered. "How long was I out? What is the situation?" Dominic asked. 4 hours. The attack is over, and the mages have knocked the corpse pile away from the walls before retiring for the morning in separate houses with guards from the riflemen. The current state of the battlefield is peaceful, but other than that, I cannot say. There have been no messages at all this morning. Everyone is too exhausted for unnecessary movement. The mage replied. "The mages from the other walls?" Dominic asked. "Cycled out with the ones loading cannons all night. You ordered it just after dark."
"Right.
"I remember that part." Dominic agreed. The mage laughed quietly. "So, he didn't wake the sleeping princess. Sit there, I will bring the food cart to you." Dominic sat and ate quietly as the mage watched for any movement among the enemy troops. The movement woke Princess Alexis, who shifted to prop herself up on the arm of the sofa and then opened her mouth for Dominic to feed her. The mage at the window made a point of ignoring the decidedly intimate moment and the small battle that ensued when Dominic tried to feed her the pineapple slices from his plate, which she absolutely despised. "All right, we're up and I need a shower. Advisor Dominic will respond to emergencies," she instructed, then got up and walked into the attached ensuite. The mage gave a tired sigh as Princess Alexis turned on the shower. "Between you and me, I don't think that we can take another assault like that. I haven't done the math yet, but the combined death toll of the last 24 hours has to be close to the total population of the city. We've lost nearly half our militia, an even larger portion of our city guard, and the riflemen are exhausted, with rifles in desperate need of service. They're still working somehow, but I've seen them using loading rods to replace broken levers, and all the rifles look like they've been through hell." Dominic nodded. "At least the rifles are still working. I should go out and see if they need any urgent repairs, though. They were made for hard work, but the number of rounds fired since this siege started is more than anyone had anticipated when they were designed. I can see that they're cleaning them properly and doing their best. But normally riflemen don't fire more than a few dozen shots a day. You know how it is." The mage gave a cynical smile. "Firsthand. I saw more than 10 of the Dago's riflemen either have a weapon explode on them or fail to fire during my shift on the north wall last night. Those temperamental rifles are nothing like what was made for the riflemen."